Hey everyone, it's time for the Pitt Mailbag Show from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Stephen Thompson, your Pitt beat writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, we bring you every Tuesday answering your questions in our Pitt Mailbag Show about the Pitt Panthers in whatever sport you may ask your questions about. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Tuesday episodes of the Pitt Mailbag Show, as well as our post-game shows that we do after every contest. And, of course, all of the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And our show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder and Associates. Whether you're injured in a car accident or hurt on the job, Edgar Snyder and Associates has helped injury victims for over 40 years recover more than $2 billion on their behalf. If you or a loved one have been seriously injured in an accident, call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. All right, Stephen, let's talk about some Pitt stuff going on here. We got a bye week last week, and we got another one coming in 3 weeks. That's kind of weird, but Pitt's now had a chance to rest. We know that they're getting back Desmond Reed after he didn't play against Youngstown State, and I think this is a good chance for Pitt to kind of reevaluate themselves right before they get into ACC play.
Yeah, we've seen them against, a couple of Power 5 opponents so far, but I mean, for the most part, I don't think many outside of Pittsburgh are that impressed with Pitt as a team, and this is a chance, I think, in an ACC opener against North Carolina in a venue where they've never won before. I think it's a chance to really announce themselves nationally as a real contender in the ACC, and who knows, maybe even a playoff contender down the road. They got to pass this first hurdle, though. It's a big one at North Carolina.
Absolutely. Let's get into some of these questions here because North Carolina is a question here. We're going to lead with the North Carolina question. Chuck asks, is North Carolina a good team? They're 3-2 with some bad losses, so why isn't Pitt favored by more than 2 points in this game? And Chuck, that's a good question because North Carolina allowed 70 points to James Madison, to the Fighting Arthur Moatses. They got utterly dusted. I remember sitting in the press box with Steven as I think it was the Backyard Brawl week, and we were watching. We were like, "What the heck is happening? How is this? How is that going on?" And I have to say, when you look at the defensive numbers that they have, they are not playing like a normal North Carolina team. Now, we all know that the Chapel Hill is a house of horrors for Pitt. They have not been able to win there since they joined. But I look at this game and I think, man, if that North Carolina team has the defensive days that they've had against some of these other opponents, this Pitt offense better thrive in a big way.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, this looks like a pretty vintage Mac Brown North Carolina team to me. I mean, they score a bunch. They can score with really the best of them. But, man, that defense, I mean, it hasn't shown up, I don't know, going back how many years, I mean, to before Mac Brown has been there. So, I think part of this is that Pitt hasn't proven much. Like I said, not many people outside of Pittsburgh are particularly impressed with Pitt's body of work so far. You can talk about how remarkable those wins against West Virginia and Cincinnati were, but those are not teams that are expected to do much of anything in the national picture, much less in their own conferences either. So Pitt has to, I think, prove themselves a little bit here. And, for as much as Pitt needs to prove themselves, I think North Carolina also poses a fairly unfavorable matchup. I mean, they can really get after you up front on defense. I mean, their pass defense has been pretty lousy so far this year, but they are 17th nationally in sacks. They're pretty disruptive up front. And then Amari and Hampton is one of the best running backs in the country, a real powerful runner. And we've seen Pitt struggle at times to not only contain the run, but contain big, powerful backs like Hampton. So, a 2-point spread, even though Pitt is the favorite, I think is, fairly generous that Pitt is a favorite at all, quite honestly. I could totally understand if, odds makers saw Pitt going into a place where they've never won before and with two teams where you don't really know a whole lot about them so far, that they would defer to the home team. But so I think it's a little bit of respect, a sign of respect that Pitt is the favorite in this game. But there's some understandable reasons why they aren't bigger favorites. You win this one, and if you're able to do it convincingly, like some think they're able to, then you'll be a heavier favorite next week against Cal. But for now, I think this is a huge prove-it game for Pitt, and that's why they're not being as respected as much as maybe some people would like.
I think that's the thing is that you prove it has been the theme that Pat Narduzzi has said all along, and this is your first ACC opponent, and you've gone undefeated so far. You've passed all the tests But now it's time to show that you can do this in the conference, which those are really the games that matters. And I think Pat Narduzzi gets that. I think that the team gets that. Pat Narduzzi said, hey, that was the preseason. We're through the preseason now. It's time to play the regular season. And so now everyone's looking to prove themselves. I think they've now seen it's not just that they've won. It's not like they've blown everybody out. They've had 2 crazy comebacks. And in those comebacks, I think they've gotten a glimpse at seeing like, hey, what are our weaknesses and how did we get out of them and how did we get into those problems in the first place? If Pitt wants to show that they can be a really good team, they have to learn from their lessons quickly. Fortunately for their record, they were able to have those lessons without them, getting blemishes in their loss column. So now this is the chance to show, hey, we can learn very quickly. I think Eli Holstein's learned very quickly. Now he has to see if his team around him has as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a big test for this. I guess they're not new anymore. They've made it through a quarter of a season, but, a bunch of first-year coaches at this level of football, thinking about Kade Bell, thinking about Jeremy Darvo, thinking about J.J. Lassiter and the running backs coach whose name escapes me, Lindsey Lamar, Jake Bernowski, a lot of these guys who are new, how they work together, how they come up with adjustments, how they ready a team when, there's a bunch more film on them now and they have a bye week to work with, but they are facing a higher caliber of opponent. How they adjust as well is just as important as, if not more important than how the players adjust too.
I'm agreed there. Let's move on to the question here. You talked about North Carolina's defensive front creating problems. Let's talk about Pitt's offensive front because Braden has a question. What are the issues with Pitt's offensive line? Is it about talent or about scheme? And this is a good question. It's a question that we asked Pat Narduzzi, on Monday at his noon press conference. And I have to say, Stephen, I felt like Pat wasn't going to, like, he acknowledged, like, hey, it's a few different things. Like, there's some things they have to get better at. Fundamentals are part of what they work on during the bye weeks. They need to get better there. But I look at a lot of what Pitt hasn't done. I mean, right now, Eli Holstein is one of the most pressured quarterbacks in the country right now. In fact, I think he's the only quarterback to have only played 4 games to have 57 pressures on him this season. That's a lot of pressures. Now, granted, that it's also a higher. He has a lot more snaps. So when you look at percentage of snaps, it's actually not as high. But still, if you're Pitt's offensive line, you need to keep this guy upright. And the more pressure that he gets, the more chances that you expose him to risk and injury moving forward. So in your eyes, Stephen, has this been simply about personnel, or do you think there's the things that Pitt can be doing smarter to protect Eli Holstein?
Yeah, quite honestly, I see them doing a lot of what you should do if your offensive line has not really been up to snuff and you've got a redshirt freshman quarterback who's in his first year of starting. I mean, they've moved the pocket a bunch. They've put him out on the run. They've let him use his legs. They have, I think, in my opinion, come up with some creative ways to mitigate that pressure. But that's why I say I don't think this has a lot to do with the scheme. I think really guys just have to play better. I'm looking at guys like Ryan Baer and Ryan Jacoby. I mean, Jacoby, I think to a lesser extent, you can kind of or to a greater extent, you can kind of understand why he's struggling a little bit. I mean, he took an entire year off of football. That's not easy for anyone to bounce back from. But I think Ryan Baer, it's perfectly fair to ask for a little bit more from him. I mean, he is the team leader and pressures allowed from that right tackle spot. And, kind of anecdotally, just watching him throughout the games, I mean, I think it's just poor technique from him. He's just getting beat off the line. He's not holding his blocks. I think Jacoby is kind of in that same category too, where guys just have to play better. And it's up and down the line. Not everyone. That's not to say the other 3 or 4 guys who have played on the offensive line, started on the offensive line this year, have been perfect. But you need your. I don't know if this is a Mike Tomlin phrase, if this is an everyone phrase, but you need your A players to play A games. And Baer and Jacoby are not necessarily superstars on this team, but they are guys that you counted on to be really solid for you up front. And if they're not going to be that, that's a big problem for Pitt.
It is. I think it's something that they need to figure out soon if they want to get things straight. Because some of these things they haven't been about alignments or anything like that. It's just about, hey, you're getting beat. You need to have better. You need to use your hands better. And these are guys with really good frames, like Ryan Baer, Branson Taylor. They are big human beings. I think that these guys need to be sharper. I think that they need to be better at establishing kind of where they are when they're dropping into their drop sets, better footwork, quicker to get their hands on guys and to hold their position, because guys are getting into their frame too easily, and that's opening up the inside shoulder to get to the quarterback. Those are the things that I think that I'm about to say the Steelers, because they're going through a very similar thing with their offensive line at times. But those are things that Pitt needs to show up very soon. If they do not, there's some ACC pass rushers that are going to be getting after Eli Holstein in a bad way. Again, let's see how they work things out. I think you bring up a very good point. Scheme wise, I think Kade Bell is doing all he can do to protect Holstein and this offensive line from getting exposed way too much. They're getting the ball out fast. They're getting the ball in creative ways. They're having different kind of run plays. They're using all the different parts of the offense. They're using all the different receivers. The running backs are involved. They can sprinkle in the tight end a little bit more, but you know what? Maybe the tight ends aren't getting as many targets because maybe they're helping in pass protection a bit more as well to help this offensive line. So I think it is less about scheme and it's more about talent. The guys who Pitt recruited, who if they want to be guys that make it to the NFL, they got to start playing like it. And I think that's something that Pitt needs to see in these first ACC games.
Yeah, especially because I also don't think the depth is particularly great. Like I've talked a little bit about, I've written a little bit about, and I think talked a little bit about how Jason Collier has been pretty good in the games that he has played in his kind of limited appearances. But outside of him, I don't think there are many guys behind this starting line, this top six or whatever, that you would trust going into an ACC game or trust, playing down the stretch of this season. So you really need that first 5 or 6 to figure it out and to find a decent enough rotation there, because there's not a ton of depth behind them.
Agreed there. Let's keep it in the ACC on the football side of things. We're going to take a step back and look at something big that happened this weekend during Pitt's bye week, and that was Miami, number 7 in the country, the team that everyone's thinking is going to run the ACC this year, and for good reason. They were going into this week, they were the number 1 defense and the number 1 offense in the conference. That Cam Ward has played very well this season, and they went down to the wire with a 2-3 Virginia Tech team. In this game, they won 38-34, and on a very controversial call at the ending where Virginia Tech looked like they hauled in a Hail Mary touchdown pass, but it was ruled incomplete. And had they ruled that complete, Miami would be 4-1 right now and 0-1 in the conference, and there'd be a lot of people smelling blood in the water. But should people smell blood in the water? And that's what Dan asks. Does Miami's near loss to Virginia Tech give you any more confidence that Pitt compete for an ACC championship? I'll lead here, Stephen. To Dan, I think that in the sense that I think that Miami is not as unbeatable as everyone has acclaimed them to be. Not everyone, but a lot of people have. I think in that way, yes. But I still need to see Pitt be consistent. I need to see Pitt play an FBS Power 5 opponent and not need a crazy comeback to pull it off. Because those are 2 historic comebacks against Cincinnati and West Virginia. 10 points in the last 5 minutes, 21 points in the last quarter and some change against Cincinnati. You can't win like that all the time, and they need to show that they can win by playing from ahead, that they can dominate a game from start to finish, or at least win a game solidly that without needing that. Because if you go up against Miami like that, they're a tough defense. They're also they're going to get after you. They're also going to put pressure on Eli Holstein. They got playmakers in the secondary. So you do that while you're also going to be doing that while your defense is up against one of the more potent offenses in your conference. So does it give me a little more confidence that Miami isn't as unstoppable as people thought? Sure, but this is still going to be more about Pitt and seeing just how good they can be down the stretch.
Yes, I would agree with you. I think this looked like a little bit more of an outlier for Miami. Cam Ward throws 2 interceptions and loses a fumble. I am not counting on him turning the ball over 3 times a game, especially in a big spot like an ACC championship game. And I cannot say that Pitt's defense has put enough pressure on opposing quarterbacks to make me think they can compete with. They can do the same thing for a Heisman contender like Cam Ward. Who knows? Maybe this just kicks off the stretch of Miami maybe looking more human and kind of reverting back to the Miami that we've known before. Maybe they cool off from a hot start. That's certainly possible. But the way things look right now, I would say you're right. I would be more confident in a Pitt team competing with this Miami team after seeing this result over the weekend. But I still think that there is such a big talent disparity between Miami and really the rest of the ACC, and that is more of a compliment to Miami than it is an insult to anyone else in the ACC. But that talent disparity is way too large, I think, to count on anything other than an outlier like Cam Ward turned the ball over 3 times in order for Pitt to win. So Pitt could show us something over the next few weeks where the defensive and offensive lines get way better and they look more ready to compete against the team with Miami's physicality and their talent level. But for right now, I still think Miami is comfortably atop the ACC in terms of championship odds, and Pitt is making some progress and climbing that ladder, but they are still, I think, a ways off from really being a serious competitor to Miami and even Clemson, who's looked a few weeks.
Yeah, I think they have their own paths to climb right now. They need to. It starts. Pat Narduzzi always preaches 1-0. Go 1-0 each week. That's all you have to worry about. Beat North Carolina this week and beat them strongly so that your offense can and limit their offense. Like if they come out and they limit Omarion Hampton to keep him under 100 yards while also putting up an obscene amount of points on North Carolina, and this is a laugher, and Steven's writing his story by 1 in the afternoon, not that it would be that soon, but but if this is a comfortable win for Pitt where they flex their muscles and they show, hey, we're here to compete in the ACC, maybe then those conversations start to happen a little bit more. But right now, Pitt's still that team that's 4-0 that everyone's looking at that like, hey, good job on your comebacks, but let's see how you do as this season continues, because it's these are long seasons. There's a lot of things that happen, and you can't always overcome everything all the time. So you got to be able to set the tone a lot earlier than they have. So good question, Dan. But that's something that we will keep an eye on as the year continues. We're going to flip the basketball here with our final question coming from Carson, who asks about Amsal Delalic, who suffered a hand injury. He said, Amsal Delalic looks like he's going to miss all practices until the season begins. What impact will that have on Pitt basketball? Now, for those who aren't familiar, Amsal Delalic was a European recruit they brought in. He is a taller guard / if you want to put him at small forward, you could do that as well. But he's a sharp shooter. He's athletic. He's older because he's been playing European ball for a little bit. But he was being brought in, as a freshman with full eligibility for his time, because this is his first time playing collegiate ball. And he was looked at as a kind of a unique piece that could be added to this Pitt basketball team as a pure scorer who can stretch the floor with his shooting ability, but also be athletic enough to attack the basket. Steven, you and I gave our predictions on the starting lineups, I think a show or two ago. And I think both of us had Delalic on the bench for Zach Austin to start the season. So if anything, I feel like this injury is going to kind of confirms that's probably what's going to happen. But I would not dismiss the idea that Delalic could figure things out once he gets back healthy sooner rather than later. You saw a similar thing happen to Jalen Lowe last year, and you saw how he turned out for Pitt.
Yeah, it definitely helps that, it seems like he's on track to be back a few days after the season opener. I think they made the announcement a little bit ago, but the timeline was 6 weeks. And so when you look at 6 weeks, that puts him back around November 7th. The opener's on November 4th. I think his combination of the fact that he has been practicing with this team, he's going to miss a bunch of the quote unquote official practices, but he will be kind of in the mix leading up into the start of the regular season. So he has some experience playing with his team. I don't think it'll be as big of a task to integrate him with everyone when the games actually start. I think the fact that he's experienced as well and older will really help him get things figured out quicker. But also, I mean, I think, if nothing else, I mean, this just, like you said, confirms what the starting lineup will be to open the year. And I think gives everyone else a chance to, I don't know, you're going to get a chance to see what Brandon Cummings looks like a little bit more. You're going to get a chance to see what maybe Marlon Barnes has a little bit. I think that's what it opens up in the earlier portion of the season. You're going to get to see, how far along those guys are, as opposed to, is Delalic, ready for this level of basketball? I think I would still call him more of a sure thing at this point than what Barnes or Cummings can be. So I think getting a look at those guys is going to be, a net positive for Pitt. It stinks to miss Delalic for 1 or 2, however many games you're going to miss him for. But Pitt's going to get a decent look at some of these younger guys with some minutes freed up and playing against maybe some lesser opponents. And then hopefully you get Delalic back in time they have a stretch of, I think, 5 games against power conference opponents in a span of maybe 2.5 weeks. So you can have Delalic back, integrated, ready to go by that stretch. I think this is a very negligible thing, and you don't have to worry about it much going into the rest of the year.
I agree. I think this is something that if everything else goes well for Pitt, like if they don't lose anybody else major, they have the talent on this roster to win without this guy. This Amsal was a really good additional piece that was going to kind of add another way for Pitt to beat teams. But especially, Pitt, the way Pitt schedules games, they're going to have time to figure it out against lesser opponents early on and get him his experience and let him feel the flow, because that's the other challenge I think that comes here is Amsal's got to get used to ACC level play, and that's not even going to happen for some time. He has to get a chance to get used to American style of play. There are 2 different styles there with how things work. So I think that's going to take a little bit of time, but I don't think it's going to take as much time as maybe it would for a 3-star freshman who's just coming up and needs to figure everything out. So to answer Carson's question, the impact, I think, like Steven's alluding to here, is it's going to be minimal. I think that they're going to find a way to work it out, and he'll be back. Now, if he re-injures it, that's a whole different story. We'll see what happens there. But right now, I think that Pitt is still in line to, I think, be a pretty good team this year and on the basketball side of things.
Absolutely. And, like you said, like the best case scenario, we don't even notice this, I think, by the time, even December or Thanksgiving rolls around. So fingers crossed for the best for Delalic, and, Pitt's hoping they'll see him back on the court soon.
Absolutely. He's Stephen Thompson. I'm Chris Carter. Stay tuned with all of our work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com. If you enjoyed this mailbag, subscribe to this channel on YouTube or on your favorite podcasting apps, and you can get all of our Tuesday episodes of the Pitt Mailbag Show, as well as the daily content from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as we get throughout this weekend, Pitt gets closer and closer to North Carolina. Stay tuned for all of our coverage. I wrote on Monday about Pat Narduzzi's press conference and what he said about the running back they're about to face and the running back Pitt's about to get back in Desmond Reed. And we'll be at Pitt practice today, Tuesday. We'll also be there Wednesday and Thursday this week before Stephen heads off to North Carolina. He's going to cover the game live from Chapel Hill. So get all of that here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette from Chris Carter and Stephen Thompson. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again very soon. Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.